Okay. Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Good. So, welcome everyone to the Apex 10 Commandments. This talk is intended for people who are learning Apex or moving from other technologies and they're starting their development in Apex, or anyone who is happy to be reminded of some good practices when you're developing in Apex. Let us introduce ourselves. My name is Julio Fernandez. I work for a company called Design It Limited. I'm a certified Salesforce developer, and we do Salesforce implementations. We build apps for the App Exchange. We do Salesforce integrations with other systems, and everything Salesforce. And this is my Twitter handle, Hulipool. So it's there if you want to contact me afterwards or ask any questions.
And I am Edith. I work in the same company as Julio in Design It. I also have a certification in the platform for development, but I come from a background from Java. So many of the commandments we are going to see are applied if you are kind of switching from technology to this platform.
So before we start with our 10 commandments, we'd like to just say thank you to Francis Pinder and Kevin Portman, because they're the ones who inspired us to build this session. Let's start with the first commandment. So the first commandment says, "Thou shalt not put queries in for loops." Okay, so Salesforce uses a multi-tenant architecture, so the resources need to be shared between different people. And the way in which Salesforce enforces the usage of the platform so that it's a good experience for everyone is by adding limits. So they are called the governor limits, and they are there so that everybody has a good experience with the platform. So queries is one of the limits of the governor limits. So in one single transaction, you cannot perform more than 100 so-called queries. So if we see this example, we are retrieving a list of 200 accounts, and for each one of the accounts, we are then retrieving the related contacts. So if we had 200 accounts, we would be sending the query for contacts 200 times. So in total, we would be using 201 queries. So that would definitely break the governor limits because the limit is set in 100. So how can we fix this? So we fix this by taking the so-called query out of the for loop. So we can see in the first line of this piece of code that we are using relationships between objects to take advantage of the relationship and get the information that we need in just one query. And then we are saving that information into the list, and we are looping over the accounts that already have the information about the contacts. So we have reduced the 201 queries to one just by taking the so-called out of the for loop. And this way, we're not breaking the governor limits.
The second commandment is "thou shalt not put DML in for loops." It's related to the one that Julio already talked, but this is kind of focused on DML operations, and the limits are different. In here is just 150. So anytime in any transaction, for example, in a tree or something like that, that you want to update or delete or insert more than 150 records, the limit is going to be broken, and you will get an error. So what happens in the code that we have in here? Well, in this example, we are getting a list of accounts, and we are limiting the list to 151. Then we are going through a for loop, and we are trying to update each account with the number of opportunities that are won that are greater than $1,000. What is going to happen here is that after the 150, I'm going to try to update that one, and it's going to break the limit, so I'm going to get an error. So how can we fix this? We can use an auxiliary list. What I'm going to do is, instead of trying to update each account kind of individually, what I'm going to do is going to add each account to a list, and at the end of the for loop, I will try and update the whole list. So in this case, it's going to be reduced to just one DML operation for the whole transaction. But still, we have a bad practice here. And what is about practice? In here, the code isn't broken or anything like that. It's going to run, and it's going to run correctly. But the problem is that we are not making kind of taking advantage of the platform. We always have to kind of know when to use code or when to use clicks. In this case, we can use a roll-up summary because the account is a master detail with opportunity. So we can just, with a roll-up summary, we can specify the filter, for example, the amount that has to be greater than $1,000.
And that leads us to the third commandment, which says, "Thou shalt not create epics if not necessary." So Salesforce provides a list of tools that let you do a lot of stuff without having to add new code. So things like roll-up summaries or workflow rules. You've got the process builder, and those are declarative features that Salesforce provides to customize your apps and your experience. And you not necessarily you need to create new code to do everything you need to do on top of what Salesforce provides you with. So this is in general a good Salesforce architectural design to have a happy balance between Apex and declarative. So just use clicks and use code wherever you need it, but don't do things with code that are already available by declarative means.
The fourth commandment is thou shalt only define one trigger per object. What does it mean? It means that anytime you need to code something for an action in an object, you have to put it all in just one trigger. And what is the reason behind this? It's because if you create many triggers for one object, the platform doesn't it doesn't tell you the first trigger that you created is the first that is going to be executed or something like that. You never know which one is going to be executed first. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to debug if there is a problem there. So it's better to just have one trigger per object.
And that is related also to the fifth commandment that says, "Thou shalt not put code in triggers other than calls to other classes and manage execution order." So we've said that all of the actions all are going to be in one trigger, and the purpose of the trigger class is to redirect the actions to the right methods. So in this piece of code, we can see that we are tracking all of the events that can happen in a trigger, but we are only focusing on the before insert and the after insert. So we've got two branches, and the first one is going to execute the action on the before insert method within the event trigger handler class. And the second branch is going to focus only on the after update, and it's going to invoke the after update method in the event trigger handler class. So this is what a trigger should do, just redirect the actions to other utility classes.
The sixth commandment is thou shalt use maps for queries whenever possible. The maps are data structure very useful for us if we are going to develop in Salesforce in the platform. Because sometimes, mainly in triggers, for example, to avoid breaking the limits of the platform, as we saw before, we can kind of in a query get lots of records in a list, for example, and then another query for many other records. But sometimes we cannot use the master detail relationships because our records are not kind of related or directly related. So in this case, we can use a map and use the ID of the object to kind of link the objects that we want in our process. And it is really easy. You just put the query, for example, as we are seeing in line number 4. We use the constructor of the map with the ID and the object that we require, then the query, and Salesforce automatically will populate those fields for you. If you already have a list and you want to use it as a map, you just send it in the constructor of the map, and you are ready to go.
Okay, commandment number 7. Thou shalt use relationships to reduce queries. We've seen that this has helped us to avoid the problem we had in commandment number 1. And it is usually a really good practice to take advantage of the relationships between objects. It will reduce the amount of so-called queries that you need to get the information that you need, and it will be all in one. And we can see in this example that we are just sending a query to the contact, but we're getting information also from the account. So we are using one query, but we're getting information from two different objects. When you go from child to parent, you can get information from up to 5 different objects. So you can go 5 levels up the hierarchy. And unfortunately, when you go from parent to child, it's just one level down. But you can get, from the account, you can get all of the related contacts. So it's returning a lot of data.
The 8th commandment is thou shalt aim for 100% test coverage. The platform requires 75% of coverage in your code if you want to deploy your solution kind of to life. But if we are developing for the platform, we should aim for 100%. This is because the tests are there for us to make sure that the requirements are covered, and we can follow 3 different cases. For example, the positive is that all your requirements are covered, and that everything that has to happen in the code is exactly happening. Like, for example, if you have an if sentence, that the positive and the negative are going to be exercised correctly. The second one would be that if you are expecting an exception, the exception is going to be thrown in your code when something bad happens. And the last one is the user profile or role. And this is very important because sometimes we are coding our classes, and sometimes the classes, they execute with permissions that our users might not have when they are using our application, and we might get errors later. So in here we have an example of the positive case, and something very important in our case, in our test, are the method start test and stop test. These methods let us kind of start the transaction for our unit tests, and then starting kind of counting the limits for the platform that we talked about before. So in here what we are doing is we are creating an event and making sure that if I send a name and a date correctly, the event is going to be inserted in the platform, and I have to assert that really happened after the fact that I inserted the event.
This is the second type of tests, which is a negative case. And in this method, what we need to make sure is that we are going to force an error that we expect, so that we know what we should react to. And we need to test that the platform is responding as we expect it to do. So if we see we're creating events that have a date in the past, and that's not going to be allowed, because the platform will have a validation rule to stop us from inserting records with dates in the past, and that is going to throw an exception. So that exception is caught by the try-catch blocks, and within the catch block, we need to double-check that the exception is the one we were expecting, because that's why this is a negative case, because we are forcing an error, and we have to prove that the error that happened is the one we are expecting. So we need to check, for example, the first assertion we do is that the error happened on the date field, and the second one is that the error is the actual validation exception that we were expecting. So we have forced an error, and now we are checking that the error is the one we were expecting and not a different one.
And the last case of test that we can use is the user profile or role. Salesforce provides a very useful method from the class system, that is the run as. If you send a user with a different profile, everything inside the code of the brackets is going to be executed in the context of that user. So in this case, I am creating a test user that might have another profile, a different one. I try to do the same exercise of creating an event, inserting it, and asserting that this is still correct for that user to be able to insert the object.
Okay, commandment number 9. Thou shalt write useful tests. this is a very important commandment, because what is a useful test? So a useful test is something that is going to make sure that your code does what you want it to do. You could just start a test method and start calling all your classes and all your methods, and that would give you 100% coverage. But if you're not asserting your code, then you are not testing it. You're just running it on a method test, but you're not making sure that it does what you expect it to do. So it is very important to use assertions and make sure that what you expect is what you get. Or that if two values should be different, you should be asserting that they are not equal. So this is very important. Not only you have to give 75% of coverage, but that coverage needs to mean something. It has to be useful. You need to make sure that what you expect is what you're getting. Don't just run your test to have it covered, because then if you deploy it, it's going to fail and it's not going to do what you want it to do.
And the last commandment is, thou shalt test one thing at a time. And this comes from the fact that the Apex tests that we are writing in our classes are unit tests. We have different levels of testing, and for example, integration or system, but these one are unit tests. And we can kind of get very useful ideas from test-driven development that tell us that every time we create a test method, this test method has to test just one thing in our system, not like many related ones. No, it's just one specific functionality of our system. In this example that we are just testing one method, that is the populate default. This method, what has to do is, like, if I send an object, it has to populate values for us automatically. So as we see, we create our event again, we call our method, and at the end we assert that we already have a name that was populated by our method. And something very useful for us, at least in our company, is like having kind of significant names of the methods. For example, in here it says populate default or name event of auto-populated value. So it means that we are kind of documenting in the name of the method what the method is trying to test.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was the list of our 10 commandments. I hope you found them useful, and I'm sure you'll be able to get the slides from Dreamforce after it's over. Thank you very much for attending, and if you have any questions, we'll be here for a few minutes. Thank you very much. Bye.